Falche Griel or Bulle, Slava Chachunum agus and you be me a brune muyen Imbolc. A warm welcome to you all. I am Slavach and today I'm going to be talking about Imbolc. But what is Imbolc? Well, Imbolc, which has been Christianized as the feast day of St. Brigid, in Irish that's La Veil Brigid, in Scottish Gaelic that's La Il Brigid, and in Manx that's La Al Brigid. And it's the symbolic beginning of spring in the Gaelic calendar. The festival was held on February 1st, or around this date. It marks the halfway point between the winter solstice and the spring equinox. And it is one of the quarter days of the Celtic calendar, along with Beltane, which was held on May 1st and symbolised the beginning of summer, Lunasa, which was held on the 1st of August and symbolised the beginning of harvest, and of course Samhain, which was held on the 1st of November and symbolised the start of winter. So in this video I'm going to explain the etymology and history of Imbolc. I'm going to talk about how it was Christianized, I'm going to talk about who Brigid was, and what are some of the traditional customs connected to this feast day. Let's start with etymology. Many scholars have accepted the etymology given by Cormac's glossary, which states that the name of this holy day comes from oimelc, which means sheep's milk. Cormac's glossary, or Sanas Cormac, was written by Cormac mac Cuillenan, a King Bishop of Munster in Ireland, who died in about 908 of the Common Era. It is a manuscript containing explanations and etymologies of over 1,400 Irish words, many lost, outdated, or difficult to understand otherwise without the glossary's help. A fun fact is that it is the earliest linguistic dictionary in any of the European non-classical languages. While Cormac's etymology is likely incorrect and states a sort of folk etymology, Cormac certainly had the right idea, linking the name of this feast day to sheep. Sheep are some of the most important domesticated animals to the inhabitants of the British Isles throughout the ages, and ewes began lambing around Imbolc time. Hence the most likely actual etymology of Imbolc is Imbolc. In modern Irish that would be spelled Imbolc, meaning in the belly or in the sack, connecting the name to the pregnancy of ewes. Now Eric P. Hamp, in an article called Imbolc, oimelc for Studia Celtica, links Imbolc to the Proto-Indo-European word for milking, which is also cognate to the Proto-Indo-European word for cleansing, which in turn suggests that Imbolc may have been some kind of a purification rite, and thus quite likely connected to the ancient Roman feasts of Februa, from which the month February gets its name, and Lupercalia. As with most ancient pagan feast days, the etymology is somewhat unclear. However, I have made an interesting observation myself. Should the etymology indeed refer to pregnancy and being in the belly or sack, then the findings of Anthony Murphy, whose excellent YouTube channel Mythical Ireland I'm going to link right here, become particularly interesting. You see, Murphy has spoken about how there's a megalithic passage tomb called the Mound of the Hostages in Tara, Ireland. Indeed, it is the oldest megalithic monument in this ancient palimpsest of an area. It's dated to around 2500 BC, and I will likely do a separate video dedicated to these megalithic monuments at Tara because they're absolutely fascinating. For now, I just want to point out the fact that the passage of the Mound of the Hostages is aligned with the sunset and sunrise on Imbolc and Samhain, which are exactly 9 months apart. This, to me, strongly evokes the concept of the symbolic pregnancy, and that's a concept often discussed by Marie Koch. In this case, it would be a period of 9 months from Imbolc, the symbolic rebirth of life, to Samhain, the symbolic death at the end of each year. Now another reason why this is interesting is that it suggests the continuity of pre-Celtic tradition, as the Neolithic passage tomb was built long before the Celts ever arrived in the British Isles, through to the Celtic Age and even up to modernity. And why do I say modernity? Surely the practice of Imbolc ended with the arrival of Christianity in Ireland. Well, no, not at all actually. The feast, like all the most important pagan holidays and feast days, was Christianized, and its ancient connection to the goddess Brigid was used in this process. I shall elaborate on the process of Christianization, but first, Let me tell you about Brigid herself. Well, since at least the arrival of the Celts in the British Isles, and quite possibly for far longer than that, Imbolc was associated with a fire goddess called Brigid. And there is quite a high likelihood that this goddess is invoked in the names of at least 3 pre-Christian Celtic tribes: the Brigantes, who in pre-Roman times controlled the largest section of what would later become northern England and the Scottish borders; a tribe called the Brigantes who lived in Ireland, who once lived around Wexford, Kilkenny and Waterford, pointed out to us by the Greek geographer Ptolemy; and lastly a tribe called the Briganti, a sub-tribe of the Vendelici who lived in the Alps, who are mentioned by Strabo. Brigid is also speculated to have given the name to the Germanic tribe of Burgundians, the founders of Burgundy. So in Tacitus's Annals and Histories, we read that the British Brigantes had a very powerful queen, Cartimandua, and to John Koch, author of Celtic Culture, a Historical Encyclopedia, the idea that a woman should hold ultimate executive power in this tribe may suggest that the tribesmen saw their queens as reincarnations of the goddess Brigid or Brigantia. Indeed, there are multiple inscriptions to Brigantia made around the area of Hadrian's Wall, and archaeologists have found a sculpture of Brigantia in Birrens, Dumfriesshire, although here she is portrayed in a clearly Roman-influenced style, and the Romans likened the goddess Brigantia to their goddess Minerva. Coming back to Ireland, there are references to a Brig or Brigid in the ancient Irish mythological tale Ca Maia Turig, which tells of a battle between the Tuatha, the godly folk, and Fomorians, evil giants. Here, Brig is the wife of Bres, who is the king of the Fomori, and her lament over the death of their son Ruadan is allegedly the first keening or typically Gaelic funeral lamentation that was ever made in Ireland. The name Brigid is also the most likely origin of at least 3 different river place names in the British Isles. We've got the Brigid in Ireland, the Brent River in England, and perhaps most interestingly of all, we've got the River Bryant on the sacred Isle of Anglesey or Ynys Môn. What's interesting about that is that the prehistoric Breen Kelly Thu, considered to be one of Wales's finest passage graves, is located a mere 200 metres from this river, which is a flood river, so it changes its course quite frequently, and this of course suggests another ancient pre-Celtic connection. But the most Indo-European feature of Brigid of all is her tripartite nature. While she was undoubtedly a goddess of fire, Cormac's glossary, which I've mentioned previously, describes 3 Brigids, all of whom were the daughters of the Dagda. One was a sage, adored by poets; one was a physician or healer; and the third was a woman of smithwork. In the world of our forefathers, a smith was the archetype of a divine creator, one who uses fire to transmute elements from raw ore to usable tools. A healer, on the contrary, used fire to prepare medicines, brews and potions, and relied on the power of the sun to release the essential oils in medicinal plants and herbs. Lastly, poetry was often seen as a form of fire in itself. The Old Irish text Cauldron of Poesy portrays poetry as an inner fire or light, which is found within everybody, but in every second one it does not shine forth. There is also a form of prophesying and soothsaying described in Cormac's glossary called Imbus Forestnai, which translates to the great knowledge which illuminates or kindles. As a final interesting side note about Brigid, there may actually be an interesting Indo-European linguistic connection between the female Brigid and, for example, the Sanskrit Bharaspati, a post-Vedic god of eloquence, one who communicated with the gods, and of course the Norse Bragi, the Skaldic god of poetry. I'm now going to start talking about Christianization. So how did the whole Christianization thing begin? Well, the belief in a fiery Brigid was so deeply rooted within the conscious and subconscious of the Gaels that the Celtic Church had to reappropriate her image rather than uproot the entire figure. Thus, although historians are unsure whether such a person ever actually lived, the pagan goddess Brigid was reinvented by the Church as Saint Brigid of Kildare, or Brigid of Ireland. In Irish that's Nu Brig, in Latin that's Brigida. According to posthumous hagiographies, Saint Brigid lived from about 451 to about 525 of our Common Era. it is clear that the pagan Brigid was one of the most highly revered goddesses in prehistoric Ireland, and the Feast of Imbolc one of the most important feast days in pre-Christian Ireland, for the church made Brigid become one of Ireland's patron saints along with Patrick and Columba. This alleged nun, abbess and founder of several nunneries across Ireland, including the extremely important monastery of Kildare, was called Moirin and Gael, that is, Mary of the Gael, for the Gaels venerated her on an equal level with Virgin Mary, and perhaps even more so. In the Hebrides, there is quite a common species of bird called the oyster catcher, which in Gaelic is called the Gael Brigid, the servant of Brigid. References to this Brigid may be found in all former Gaelic and Gaelic-speaking areas, any of the dozens of Kilbride place names in Scotland, Kirkbrides, a Logie Bride in Perthshire, even to Eilean Bhrídeas, Islands of Brigid, one off of Islay and one off of Jura. I'll put a link to all the place names associated with this Brigid so that you can see the extent of the cult and veneration that she had for yourselves. To further prove my points, I would like to highlight the strong presence of sun and fire symbolism in all oral and written hagiographies describing Brigid's life as a saint. I plan to make a separate video which talks about the ways in which the church used hagiographies and descriptions of miracles to further their agenda of converting native Europeans and adding its Christian saints into the native European pantheon. But in this video I wish to mention the fact that fire plays an important part in the opening of the early 9th century text, Life of Brigid, Bough. For example, the hut in which the infant Brigid is sleeping catches fire, but somehow she survives unscathed. Her Christian uncle and a friendly druid see a fiery column rising from her hut during the night, and they both agree that she must be a holy girl. When she grows up and prepares to take the veil as a nun, rejecting marriage, a fiery column rises from her head as the bishop reads the words of consecration. St. Brigid's cross, which I shall mention again when describing customs connected to Imbolc, was hung up on the doors of houses to protect them against fire. Furthermore, Brigid is born exactly at sunrise as her mother steps over the threshold holding a bowl of milk, which to me evokes both the link of Imbolc to milking as well as the symbolic sunrise and beginning of spring. Our good friend Gerald of Wales visited Ireland in the 12th century. When he was there, he describes a sacred, inextinguishable hearth dedicated to Brigid, which he saw in a special enclosure at St. Brigid's Abbey in Kildare. And I quote, "It is not that this fire is strictly speaking inextinguishable, but that the nuns and holy women have so carefully and diligently kept and fed it with enough material that through all the years from the time of the Virgin Saint until now it has never been extinguished. The 19 holy women who work there all take their turn, one each night, in guarding the fire. When the 20th night comes, the 19th nun puts the log beside the fire and says, 'Brigid, guard your fire, this is your night.' And in this way the fire is left there, and in the morning the wood, as usual, has been burnt, and the fire is still alight. This fire is surrounded by a hedge which is circular and made of withies, and which no male may cross. Only women are allowed to blow the fire, and then not with the breath of their mouth, but only with bellows or a winnowing fork." Gerald of Wales' account paints a picture of an abbey where Christianization was quite clearly only theoretical. The all-female sacred space, wicker-woven hedge, and inextinguishable fire are extremely pagan motifs, not to mention that the place name Kildare actually means Kildara, cell or church of oak. Gerald of Wales' account also evokes associations to the cult of Hestia, the Roman goddess of hearth. It has even been suggested that the nuns and holy women of Kildare might have been the Christian descendants of a college of women who were once attendants at the shrines of Brigid the goddess. That's a quote from Celtic Christianity and Nature by Mary Lowe. Indeed, the connections between the pre-Christian Brigid and Saint Brigid of Kildare are far too strong to be incidental. In Alexander Carmichael's Carmina Gadelica, we may read 3 different prayers from the Hebrides in which Saint Brigid was invoked alongside Mary for the protection of the hearth while lighting and smothering the fire every day. I'm now going to say a few things about the pre-Christian customs which had survived in the Gaeltacht areas of Ireland and Scotland until the 20th century, and some perhaps to this very day. First of all, we've got St. Brigid's cross. In Irish that's cross Brigid, crosser Brigid or Bough Brigid. These small crosses were made of rushes or straw woven together on the day of Imbolc itself. Typically it has 4 symmetrical arms and its centre is composed of a woven square. Its resemblance to the song cross is really uncanny, and at the very least its 4 arms represent the 4 Celtic seasons of Imbolc, Beltane, Lunasa and Samhain. As I've mentioned before, these crosses were placed in the eaves of roofs or hung up on the doors of houses as protection against fire and harm. Some people may put a Brigid's cross on their gravestone as well. I'm also going to post a link to a tutorial video which teaches you how to make a St. Brigid's cross yourself right here. Now, the Brigid procession shows us that Brigid customs celebrate a deity who dies in the autumn and is born again in the spring. In the Highlands of Scotland, the last sheaf of the harvest was often known as the granny or hag, Catháin, and the same word was used in the medieval tradition for all kinds of old and frightening women from the other world. Then, at the beginning of February, at the feast of Brigid, it was the custom in the Hebrides to take a sheaf from the previous year's harvest, the Catháin, form it into a female figure and carry it from house to house. This effigy was known as the Brigid. I would like to point out the symbolic similarities of this custom and, for example, the Balto-Slavic custom of creating and destroying a female effigy of Marzanna, Mara, Marinka, More or Masha, however you may call her. And also the pan-European custom of creating corn dollies described by James Frazer in his excellent book on European paganism, The Golden Bough. Anyhow, the girls of the village, dressed in white and with their hair down to symbolise their unmarried status, would take the Brigid to every house in the town. Each person who answered the door was expected to give a gift to Brigid, which could be something to decorate the Brigid with, like a colourful ribbon or feather, or something for the girls to eat once they had finished visiting houses. Mothers would traditionally give out the Bonnach Brigid, the bannock of Brigid, or else the Cabag Brigid, Brigid's cheese, or Rollic Brigid, the butter roll of Brigid. Now all the food collected would then go towards forming the Feish Brigid, which is the feast of Brigid, and it would take place once all the houses had been visited in the village. Initially the door to the house, let's call it a Gaelic house, because it would be the house where everyone was assembling, would be locked and barred, and the boys in the town would come up to the door and knock, asking to be let in. After some good-natured persuasion, they eventually would be allowed inside, and the feast and merriments could then begin, with much dancing and storytelling taking place until the early hours of the next day. As the party broke up, any remaining food would be shared between the poor women of the village. Another traditional aspect of St. Brigid's Day was weather divination connected to this day. Most usually, it was the custom to believe that if the weather was good on St. Brigid's Day, or Imbolc, then there was a horrible winter yet to come and some very, very cold days ahead. For example, there's a short rhyme in Scots about the weather connected to Candlemas Day, which is literally the day after St. Brigid's Day, and is celebrated pretty much around the Roman Catholic world. Candlemas Day, gin ye be fair, the half winters to come and mair. Candlemas Day, gin ye be foul, the half winters gain at yo. In Gaelic, there was the following rhyme. Le faun fedalich hiken na haras and tol, le down Brigid, gedro tri troyen again de snach lech and lar. Talking about how on St. Brigid's Day, snakes and such would come out of their holes, which of course is an indication that hibernation and the winter sleep was over and life was coming back out. You can kind of see it as a metaphor for snowdrops poking their heads as the first flower of spring. Now, for the last part, I'm just going to read you a short passage from a book called Festival of Brigid by Séamus o Catháin. Aspects of the traditional celebration of the coming of spring in Ireland and Scotland may be linked with that virtual linchpin of circumpolar culture, the bear cult. More importantly for us, the establishment of this connection opens a challenging new perspective on the traditions of the Celtic peoples. The bear's singular habit of hibernating resulted in it being looked upon as a king of Zeitgeber in respect of the shifting seasons. In northern climates, the emergence of the bear from its slumbers in springtime marked a turning point in the year. The animal was thus effectively cast in a similar role to Brigid, who manifests herself in a parallel situation within the context of the festival held in her honour. Ireland has been bear-free, so to speak, for 4,000 years or thereabouts. In spite of this fact, aspects of the bear feast, as celebrated by the Sami people, the Finns and others, and other elements such as the story of the bear wife of Sami and Icelandic tradition, can be traced to Celtic soil and run to ground in the context of Brigid and her festival. I find it completely fascinating that there could be a connection between the beliefs of the Scandinavians and the pre-Celtic beliefs of the British Isles, which were later then transformed into Celtic beliefs as the Celts arrived. Well folks, Shinné. That's all I've got to say about Imbolc. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up, and hopefully I will see you again in the near future with some more similar content to this, so stay tuned.